Welcome to the third annual Savta Shiur. I traditionally give this Shiur around the time of my grandmother's yahrzeit, and the last 2 years I've done it on Zoom. This year I was invited to Beit-El to give the Shiur in person this coming Shabbat Yitro. But I also wanted to make it available for anyone else that's interested in listening. So this shiur is in memory of my Savta, Minette Schwartz Radin Kochman, the daughter of Loois and Bertha Schwartz. Her 8th yahrzeit was Tu B'Shvat. It is also in memory of Lillian Claff, who is Debbie Dan's mother, Leah bat Mayer Leyb ושפרינצה. Her 15th yahrzeit was Yud Zayin Shvat, and it is in her memory specifically that I'll be going to Beit-El to give this shiur. It's also in memory of Debbie's Savta, Sadie Jaffe, Shprinza bat David Verazel, and that was Lillian's mother. Her 56th yahrzeit was Aleph Shvat. And also for another special Savta in our family, Yolanda Blyer Rosenshine, Yenti Gitel bat Shmuel Zev Vשיינדל. This is my father-in-law's mother, Aleha Shalom. Her 4th yahrzeit is coming up on Chavtet Shvat. So in honor and in memory of these beautiful ladies, I'm going to give this shiur. So it's interesting, about 5 years ago, I actually also gave this shiur in Beit-El, and I spoke about Kibud Av, the sandwich generation. If anybody would like source sheets for that, they're available on Sefaria. And since this week's Parsha is Parshat Yitro, and we have the Aseret HaDibrot, which feature Kibud Av, I thought that it was appropriate to revisit this topic. So I have titled this Kibud Av Revisited. And I want to come at it from a little bit a different way than I've thought about Kibud Av before. So first, I want to look at all of the Aseret HaDibrot, or the Aseret HaDvarim, that we meet in this week's Parsha in Yitro. So I have them listed on the source sheet in 2 columns. Just to go over them, the first Dibra, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Hashem is our God. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim, there are no other gods besides Hashem. Lo tisa Shem Hashem l'shav, don't take God's name in vain. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, to observe the Shabbat. The 5th commandment is Kibud et avicha v'et imecha, honoring one's parents. The 6th commandment, Lo tirtzach, do not murder. Lo tinaf, don't commit adultery. Lo tignov, don't steal. Lo ta'aneh bere'acha ed shaker, don't bear false witness. And lo tachmod, don't covet. So, and I've divided them into 2 groups. And how do we know that, like, this is, an iconography that we find in Batei Knesiot and shuls all over the world from almost time immemorial, that we see the 10 commandments divided into 2. And where does that come from? I think it's just this idea that we all have. And actually, I had prepared this whole shiur, and then I started thinking, but I'm basing most of it on assumptions that we all work with, but do we actually know where they come from? And I started just looking on the internet, and I found a very interesting article by Dr. David El-Gavish from Michelet Herzog, who actually brought a lot of the sources that I'm going to look at right now, of how we know that the Aseret HaDibrot are divided into 2. And I also titled the first column as Bein Adam L'Makom, between man and God, and the second column, Bein Adam L'Chavero, between man and his fellow. And these are ideas that I just sort of take for granted. And then I started thinking, well, where do they actually come from? And if you're wondering where Kibud Av fits into this, we see that Kibud Av is the fifth commandment, and it's sort of placed on the cusp in the center between Ben Adam L'Makom and Ben Adam L'Chavero. And we might ask ourselves, which column does it actually belong in? Is it a commandment? It's a commandment to honor our parents. Our parents are other human beings, so maybe we think it should belong in the second column. But the Torah clearly puts it in the first column. So and that's what we're going to get into maybe in the second part of the shiur, but first let's look at the fourth source on your source sheet, the Torah T'mima. So the Torah T'mima, this is actually on Devarim, which is it's the second time that the Aseret HaDvarim are mentioned. And the Torah T'mima says, Tanya, it brings up Vברטה, Ketzad hayu haluchot ktuvim. How were the tablets built? Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Omer, Chamisha al luach zeh, v'chamisha al luach zeh. So 5 on this tablet and 5 on the other tablet. Shneimar vayichtavem al shnei luchot avanim. Because it's written here in Dvarim that they were written on 2 stone tablets. The Rabbanan Amri, there's actually a different opinion. Asara al luach zeh, v'asara al luach zeh. They're not, the Chachamim are not saying that they were all written on one tablet. They acknowledge that there's 2 tablets, but they have the opinion that all 10 were written on the first tablet, and then all 10 were repeated on the second tablet. Why do they say this? Dichtiv, they bring a pasuk, vayaged lachem et brito asher tziva etchem la'asot aseret hadvarim. So that you're commanded to do this brit, these 10 things. So the entire brit is all 10 things, and each was on each luach. But we clearly, the opinion that we've adopted over the years is Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. And the reason I think that I'm bringing this source is because I don't know another source for this Vברטה. So the Torah T'mima is actually a very late source, but this is the source that I found. I don't know if it's that everyone else just assumes that this is how things are. And now we're going to go into the question of why is Kibud Av clearly in the first column? Also, sorry, before that, how do we know that those labels, I put those labels up there, Ben Adam L'Makom, Ben Adam L'Chavero, but how do we know that that's the grouping category for each section? So the Ibn Ezra on our parsha says, "V'hagaon Rav Sadia chiber atharot v'klal kol hamitzvot be'ela aseret hadvarim." So umatza Hashem hanichbad b'chamisha dvarim harishonim. So the Ibn Ezra quotes Rav Sadia Gaon, who notes that in the first 5 dibrot, the name of Hashem appears. And in the last 5, the name of Hashem does not appear. Uvedibur hachamishi katuv Hashem ki ha'avot mishatfin imo b'yitzirato. So he also has our question, why is Shem Hashem mentioned in Kibud Av? And he says it's because the parents join with God in creating us. Ve'im lo yichabdem ki'ilu eino mechabed Hashem. And if we don't honor our parents, it's as if we're not honoring God. So it's kind of connected to the third dibra. The third dibra is lo tisa et Shem Hashem l'shav, like not taking God's name in vain. In other words, that we have to respect God. So respecting our parents is an extension of respecting God. And then he just adds v'chamisha dvarim hanotorim hem keneged ha'adam. So the last 5 dibrot are man-centered mitzvot. So the Ibn Ezra is saying that that parents are similar to God in that they also create, and by respecting parents, we're respecting God. I want to bring 2 other opinions for why Kibud Av is in the Ben Adam L'Makom category. So the Ramban says, "Kabed et avicha הנה השלים כל מה שאנו חייבים בדברי הבורא בעצמו וכבודו, וחזר לצוות אותנו בענייני הנבראים. So actually the Ramban doesn't place Kibud Av squarely in the Ben Adam L'Makom category. He says the first 4 dibrot are what we are obligated vis-a-vis the Creator. And then the Chazar L'Tzavot Otanu B'Nyanei HaNivraim. So the 5th commandment is actually the transition between what we are commanded to do to God and what we are commanded to do vis-a-vis our other creations. And parents are that link in the chain. והתחיל מן האב שהוא לתולדותיו כעניין בורא ומשתתף ביצירה. So he still describes parents as joining with God in creation, but he's using that to make a different point that they're actually the transition. כי Hashem Avinu Harishon, God is our first father, והמוליד אבינו האחרון, and our biological father is our last father. V'lakach amar b'mishneh Torah, and then it says in Dvarim, כאשר ציוויתיך בכבודי, כן אנוכי מצווך בכבוד. As you are commanded in my honor, in my respect, I command you to honor המשתתף עמי ביצירתך, the one who joins with me in your creation. So the Ramban sees the parent as this transitional figure, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit more later. That parents are what it means to be a parent, and as parents as the bridge between God and man, and it's interesting because what we're trying to do what the Ramban is saying that we're doing with respecting our parents is we have this divine commandment to respect parents, and that will bring us to also respect our fellow man. And then the last point that I want to make in this same vein is from the Sefer HaIkarim. I found it from this article that I'm quoting, but it's a very interesting book. The Sefer HaIkarim was written by Rav Yosef Albo in 1425 in Spain. And it's sort of a reaction to the Rambam has 13 principles of faith, and Rav Yosef Elbo actually boils down all the principles into only 3 principles, and he actually took a bit of flack from this because he doesn't mention Mashiach as one of the principles of faith. But anyway, not so important for our purposes. He has a whole ma'amar about the Aseret HaDibrot and connecting the Aseret HaDibrot to his principles. So first of all, in the first section that I brought for you, Sefer HaIkarim Ma'amar Gimel, Chavvav Bet, he says, Ki b'luach ha'echad hayu ha'chamisha dvarim harishonim she'adam mechuyav ba'asiyatan mitzad kabbalat Elohut yitbarach b'zeh haderech. So the first luach of the first 5 things is accepting God. Ki kmo, and he has a very interesting mashal. כי כמו מלך אחד שבנה מדינה והלך ולקח עבדים והוציאם לחירות והושיבם בתוכה, ואחר כך בא אליה לדבר עמהם כדי שיקבלו עליהם את עול מלכותו. So he has a whole parable for God creating the world. So he says it's like a king. The king builds this wonderful country, and he goes and he finds these slaves. And he frees them, he brings them out to freedom, and he puts them in this land, in this country that he's created for them. And afterwards, he goes to that country to speak to them, to say, okay, I did all this for you, and now it's your turn to accept my kingship. And he goes through all of the dibrot and connects them to this mashal, to this parable. So when he gets to Kibud Av, he has something very interesting to say. He says, "V'achar kach amar kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, lefi shehu min hayadua, שאין המלך שבנה המדינה נגלה בכל יום לאנשי המדינה ההיא. So we know that the king builds this country, but he doesn't reveal himself to the average citizen every single day. ואם יזכרו אנשי הדור ההוא שראו ביאת המלך אל המדינה את קבלת עול מלכותו, ושהמלך בנה המדינה, ושהוציאם מעבדות לחירות. הנה הבאים, so the first generation will remember that the king came to visit them, and he spoke with them, and he brought them out to freedom. הנה הבאים אחריהם שלא הרגישו בעבדות כלל. So the people that come after them, after that first generation, they don't remember that they were in servitude at all. ושלא ראו כניסת המלך במדינה, and they never saw the king come to visit the country. יבואו למרוד ולחשוב שהמדינה הייתה שלהם תמיד. So then they're going to rebel because they're going to think that this country was theirs to begin with. ושאין להם מושל עליהם, and nobody's ruling over them. ואין דרך לצאת מן השטות הזה, אלא בהיותם נכנעים אל האבות. And the only way to get out of this ridiculousness, to this stupid idea, is for them to be subservient to their fathers. ומקבלים המוסר מהם, and that they accept musar, that they accept rebuke and teachings from their fathers, כי הם יודיעו את בניהם איך היו עבדים, because the fathers will tell their children what it was like to be slaves. ושאדון אחד הוציאם לחירות, and that this particular master brought them out to freedom. והוא שבנה המדינה, and he was the one that built the country, והשכין אותם בתוכה, and made them and let them sit in it. ולזה היה מן ההכרח, כדי שלא תשתכח ממשלת המלך מעל המדינה הטובה שעשה עמהם, שהוציאה מעבדות לחירות. And this is necessary, it's critical for them to be able, so that they won't forget the king who set up this nation for them and took them out to freedom. שיכנעו הבנים בכל דור ודור אל האבות ויקבלו דברי מוסרם עליהם. And this has to continue in every generation. In every generation, the children have to listen to the fathers, and then they'll get this tradition. ובעבור זה בא הדיבור החמישי, and that's the place of this fifth דיברה, שהוא כבד את אביך ואת אמך, להזהיר על הקבלה. So that's why we're commanded to respect our parents, so that we ensure this masoret, this transition, the Kabbalah from one to the other. רוצה לומר שימשך האדם לקבלת האבות, שימשך האדם לקבלת האבות, so that man should be drawn to to receiving this tradition from his fathers, שזה עיקר כולל לכל הדתות, and this is actually something general for all religions, שלא ייווצר מציאותם אם לא יהיה האדם נשמע לקבלת האבות וחכמי הדת. Because religion would disappear if people didn't listen and follow the words of their of the people that are in charge of the chachamim of whatever religion. So I thought that was a very interesting idea, that the role of parents is this institutional memory, and that parents are actually the source for our observing all mitzvot. So those are really three different ideas of why Kibud Av is connected to God. So either it's because parents are partners with God, and therefore parents are this conduit. Like, first we learn how to respect our parents, and that will bring us to respect God. Or the opposite, if we don't respect our parents, we're also disrespecting God. Also, parents as this transitional piece in that parents stand somewhere halfway between man and God. Parents are an example of our fellow man, but they're also an example of being closer to God. So, but in the Ramban's idea, it's respecting parents will bring us to respect our fellow man. And the Sefer Ikarim really makes a point that parents are our key to our tradition, and the key to keeping all mitzvot is through respecting our parents. I actually found inspiration for all of these different ideas in the different sources of Kibud Av. So I didn't quote it here, but where do we find? I mean, we find the mitzvah of Kibud Av in the Aseret HaDvarim, but when we're learning in Mishnah and Gemara, I don't know where exactly we would expect to find the mitzvah of Kibud Av. Where we do find it is in Masechet Kiddushin. The first parak of Masechet Kiddushin, the first half of the parak actually speaks about of all kinds of kinyan, of how to acquire things. One of which being a wife. That's how it starts, doing kinyan isha. But then it goes off onto how we acquire fields and animals and all different kinds of things. So that's Mishnayot Aleph through Hey. And then Mishnayot Vav through Yud are a section of Mishnayot that all start with the word kol. And I erased it from the source sheet, but I think I'm going to add it back on. The Mishnah of Kibud Av is kol mitzvot ha'av haben. And it continues like that. So there's two reasons. The Professor Albeck, who explains how the Mishnah is built, says that this section of mitzvot, or the section of Mishnayot, are put here just because they all sound the same. They all start with kol, so we put them all here. The Meiri has more of a content idea of why the mitzvot of, not necessarily Kibud Av, but why these mitzvot are here, these Mishnayot are here, because the Mishnah of Kibud Av starts with Kibud Av, but then it continues for mitzvot that women are obligated or not obligated. This is something I spoke about before of women's obligation in Kibud Av. The short version is that women are obligated to honor and respect their parents, but women are also obligated to honor their husbands. So if there is a conflict of interest between parents and spouses, a woman is actually obligated to honor her spouse first and then her parents. But that being said, the Meiri says that the reason that these Mishnayot are brought here is because we move from marriage to pru'uruvu, and to being fruit, to having children, and then to mitzvot that a woman is exempt from. So he sees everything as similar conceptually. Whatever the case may be, the Mishnah Zayin of Parak Aleph in Kiddushin is where the Mishnah speaks about Kibud Av, and therefore the Gemarot surrounding it, it's Kiddushin Lamed, Lamed Aleph. There's a couple of pages that talk about Kibud Av, and I'm going to pick out a couple of pieces. There's the Gemara is very rich in its different. There's different stories about how different rabbis did Kibud Av, and all different ideas. So I picked out a couple that I think have to do with what we spoke about before. So the first Gemara I want to look at is in Kiddushin Lamed Amud Bet. And the Gemara says, Tano Rabbanan, we learned in a Vברטה, Ne'emar, kabed et avicha v'et imecha, v'ne'emar, kabed et Hashem mehonecha. So we have our pasuk of kabed et avicha v'et imecha, and then a pasuk in Mishlei of honor God from all your money. Hishva hakatuv Kibud Av lichvod hamakom. So we see from the juxtaposition of these two psukim that honoring or respecting parents is equivalent to honoring and respecting God. And that's an idea that we saw in the Mefarshim on the Torah also. And this may be where they got it from. Ne'emar ish imo va'aviv tira'u. This is, we speak about Kibud Av as kibud and mora. We usually translate it as kibud is respect or positive things that we do to honor our parents, and mora or tira'u is fear. Generally more negative things that we don't do, and that shows our fear of parents. And a different time, I think we spoke about the difference between these two things and what are the examples. But for our purposes here, we're looking at this pasuk of Ishimo v'aviv tira'u, which is actually in Sefer Vayikra. I quoted it at the top of the source sheet. V'ne'emar et Hashem Elokecha tira. And actually the continuation of that pasuk is that of the Otot Tabot, that we fear God and serve Him. So this juxtaposition, Hishva HaKatuv, Mora'at Av Ve'em Lemora'at HaMakom. So fear of God is also equivalent to fear of parents. And then a third juxtaposition, Ne'emar Mekalel Aviv V'imo Mot Yumat. So anyone who curses their parents, the penalty is death. V'ne'emar Ish Ish Ki Kalel Elokav V'nasa Chet'o. So also anyone who curses God also has the death penalty. Hishva HaKatuv Birkat Av Ve'em LeBirkat HaMakom. So if you'll notice the wording here, the Gemara doesn't actually like to say the word curse. So it says Birkat Av Ve'em, blessing parents. It really means cursing. So cursing parents is the equivalent to cursing God. Aval b'haka'ah vadai efshar, but it draws the line at there's also the death penalty for if a person hits their parents, but for that there's no parallel with God because clearly nobody's hitting God. Okay, but so that's the thing. We have kibud, mora, and kilul, and all of them have psukim that make them equivalent to the same things with God. V'chen bedin, and so we also know sheshloshtan shutafin bo, so that there's three beings are a partner in making man. Tanu Rabbanan, shlosha shutafin hen ba'adam. So there are three partners in making man. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, v'aviv v'imo. God and his father and mother. Bizman she'adam mechabed et aviv et imo, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ma'aleh ani alehem ki'ilu darti benehem v'chibduni. So when a person honors his father and mother, God says, I watch over the Ma'aleh, I make it as if I dwell among them and they're honoring me. So the fact that a person honors his parents, God looks at that and says, oh, I'm also there among them. And by honoring parents, they're also honoring me. And sort of the flip side of that, a Gemara on the next page, Kiddushin Lamed Aleph says, Tani Tana Kameh de Rav Nachman. So a Tana said this Vברayta in front of Rav Nachman, Bizman she'adam mitzaer et aviv ve'et imo, if someone troubles their parents, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yafeh asiti shelo darti benehem. It was good that I'm not dwelling among them. She'ilmale darti benehem tziaruni. Because if I would dwell among them, they would also bother me. So we see from this that both sides, that honoring parents is like honoring God. And if you're evil to your parents, then God kind of takes a step back and says, well, they probably would not honor me either. They would probably bother me too. And so again, this is all this idea that parents are this conduit to God, and sort of, I don't really want to say a representation of God, but sort of God's representative in our lives. And it makes sense because as children, who teaches us about God? Our parents are the ones that teach us about God. It's also interesting to note that, so we talked about the source of Kibud Av in the Mishnah, and when the Rambam writes his halachot, where does he put Kibud Av? I'm not sure if I really would know, where I would put it, but the Rambam puts it in Hilchot Mamrim. So what's Hilchot Mamrim? Mumar is somebody who rejects authority. Basically, usually rejecting the authority of the court, or rejecting religion, or any of those kind of things. And Kibud Av is stuck in those halachot. So in Perek Vav of Hilchot Mamrim, halacha Aleph, this is on your source sheet in the Mishnah Torah, he says, Kibud Av ve'em mitzvat aseh gdola, v'chein mora av ve'em. So again, Kibud Av ve'em and mora av ve'em is a big mitzvah. Shakal otan hakatuv b'chvodo uv'mora'o. Katuv kabed et avicha v'et imecha, v'katuv kabed et Hashem me'onecha. He's quoting the Gemara here that the Mikra, the text, is giving the same weight to honoring and fearing God and honoring and fearing parents. And he's quoting the same psukim. So just at the end, he says, "Kederach shetziva al kvod shemo hagadol umora'o kach tziva al kvodam umora'am." So again, he brings it lahalacha that this equivalence between honor of God and fear of God, and honor and fear of parents. Another interesting Gemara that I found from Kiddushin Lamed Aleph, Darash Ula Rabba Apitra Zebei Nasiya. So Ula Rabba gave this drasha in the doorway to the house of the Nasi. So what does this pasuk mean? That all the kings of the earth will acknowledge God. Kishamru imrei picha. Sorry, the pasuk says Yuducha Hashem kol malchei eretz ki shamu imrei picha, that the kings of the earth will acknowledge God because they heard the words of your mouth. Ma'amar picha lo ne'emar ela imrei picha. So it doesn't say the word of your mouth; it says imrei picha, like several words. So several sayings. So what does this mean? בשעה שאמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אנוכי ולא יהיה לך, אמרו אומות העולם לכבוד עצמו הוא דורש. So we know we have lots of midrashim that all the nations of the world heard the Aseret HaDibrot. So when they heard Anochi Hashem lo yeh lecha, they said, oh, this God is interested in his own kavod, in his own respect. Kevan she'amar kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, once they heard the fifth dibra of kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, chazru v'hodu lema'amarot harishonot. And then they went back and said, oh, now we understand the first dibrot, that it's all part of the same system, and he's not just wanting his own kavod. Right, I think I'm going to stop there. So that this idea of acknowledging that parents also deserve respect is to the nations of the world. This proved that God is really true, and that his that he knows that it's not all about him kiviyachol. It's also that he recognizes the roles of other people, of and specifically parents. Okay. So I think what we've seen is that parents have a very pivotal role to play in our relationship with God. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, let's see. And I think that parents also teach us about relationships. Our parents are really our first interpersonal relationship, and making that a good relationship paves the way for good relationships with others. But what happens when maybe our relationship with our parents is not so great? Or what if our parents don't exemplify God in our lives? So it's interesting that in the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam goes through several examples of what happens with evil parents. So in Halacha Yud Aleph, he says, "Afilu haya aviv rasha ubal averot michavdo umityare mimenu." So even if his father is an evil person and does lots of averot, he still has to respect him and fear him. And I think that this is also based on the fact that a parent's source of respect and fear is not from the person themselves. It's because they're this conduit to God. And why are they the conduit to God? Not because of their actions, but because they also are creators. They created this child. And I mean, that's what we say. You don't pick your family. Your family gets, your family is. So once a parent bears a child, they have been set in this role as a creator, and they have already done this partnership with God. So even if their subsequent actions do not invite respect, we still owe them this minimal amount of respect because of their role as a creator. The Rambam goes on to say, Ra'ahu over al divrei Torah. Lo yomar lo, Abba, avarta al divrei Torah. So you see your father transgressing the Torah. You can't just go up to him and say, Abba, you're transgressing the Torah. But you also can't just stand by and not do anything, because we have other mitzvot. Like your father is also your friend. He's also your fellow Jew. So what's the proper way to let your father know that he's not doing the right thing? Ella yomar lo Abba katuv b'Torah kach v'kach ki'ilu hu shoel mimenu v'lo k'matzhiro. So he says to his father, isn't it written in the Torah, this and this? And he makes it in the form of a question, not as if he's saying, hey, listen, this is what it says to do, but he's sort of giving his father a gentle reminder that maybe the Torah says to do this. Okay. Oh, this was also a nice halacha, that parents, yes, parents are meant to be respected and feared, but parents are also educators and facilitators. And the Rambam in Halacha Chet says, "Af al pi shebekach nitztavenu, asur la'adam lahachbid elo al banav v'ledakdek b'chvodo imahem shelo yiviem l'dei michshol." So even though we're commanded to respect our parents, it's forbidden for a man to make his yoke heavy on his child and to be too exacting with his kavod, because it's just going to make them stumble. This is another important principle, that a father who forgoes his respect, his kavod, the kavod he doesn't have to respect it anymore. And this is different than like a king. A king is another example of someone who gets kavod through God and from God. And a king, in machal al kvodo lo machul, he can't forego the respect that he's due. But a father is allowed to. So in some ways, his kavod does come from God, but it can also be dispensed with. But it's also interesting that it shouldn't be lifnei iver. You shouldn't make it so difficult for your children to do kavod. And I wanted to end with another interesting halacha that is also very relevant to people with elderly parents. And we see that in our relationship with our parents changes over time. But our parents are still our parents. So, as children, it's very easy to be in awe of parents and to fear parents. As we get older and we become more our parents' peers, so that's a challenge. How do we be properly respectful? And then as our parents grow older and need us to care for them and are possibly not in their right minds, how do we continue to respect them? So the Rambam actually has a halakha about this. It's Hilchot Mamrim, Perek Vav, Halakha Yud. Mi shenitrafa da'ato shel aviv. So if his father is not in his right mind, o shel imo, or if his mother, mishtadel linhog imahem kafi da'atam. He should strive to act with them according to their da'at, to their place at the time. Ad sheyucham alehem, until he has mercy on them. So he has to put himself in their place, and he has to act according to their perspective. I just read a very interesting list of wishes for people with dementia, that people with dementia want to be treated as people, as adults. And it's true, they may not be in our time, and their perception of time may be different, but we should go along with it. And as much as possible, act with them according to how they're thinking and try to put ourselves in their place and have mercy on them. And the Rambam also acknowledges that it might be too difficult. He does all he can with this parent who is not in their right minds, and it's just too hard for him now to care for them properly. Yinichem v'yelech lo. And he should go and he should appoint someone else to take care of them in a proper way, in a way that is fitting for them, and that is perfectly acceptable, and that he should acknowledge it. And the truth is, the Rambam gets this from some very strange stories in the Gemara, and I don't feel that I'm capable of explaining the stories, but this is how the Rambam distilled it down to the halakha, and I think that the halakha is really something that we can take away with. And I think I want to end there. So just to sum up, we've seen that Kibud Av is this pivotal mitzvah. It bridges the Aseret HaDvarim between Bein Adam Lemakom and Bein Adam Lechavero. And it's because parents have this unique place as a bridge between God and man. Parents are our link to God in that they gave us life and they partnered with God to give us life. They are also our first example of an interpersonal relationship. And for all of these reasons, it's very important that we work on our respect of these very special people. So, thank you.